Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this edition of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted, and it's a privilege to have in today's virtual studio, Ram V. Iyer. And you can reach Ram. Before I introduce him, I just want everyone to know that you'll find in the show notes. But as a way of reaching him, you can do that at MITRAMIYER, mitramiyer.com. And Ram is a unique individual, having worked in business and for over 30 years and having a career that, in his own words, has gone through several highs and several lows, having 2 master's degrees, one from MIT, a business degree, a big network, lots of travel, constant learning. He's been a Fortune 100 executive, a Silicon Valley VC. So for many in our audience who are in the Silicon Valley or in the technology industries, Ram brings experience there. He has worked on identifying what's derailed his career, what's enabled his career. And in Money Magazine, a 2-page spread called him the comeback kid because of his ability to reinvent himself. He has done some amazing work in being part of this business journey as a thought leader, keynote speaker, workshop leader, author, and so much more. Ram, why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our audience?
What more can I add after that introduction, Mike? Many thanks for having me on the show.
I'm so glad that you're here, but talk about some of your successes, and then we'll talk about some of the things that didn't work out so well.
Well, I've had, I was thinking about this earlier today. I've probably had more high highs and more low lows than, 95, maybe 98% of the audience that are listening to this. And I don't say this by way of bragging. I'm not bragging. I'm just pointing out that I've seen some big highs. I come from a very large family, and I'm not kidding you. I have 57 first cousins. Okay, 57 first cousins. My father was the first person to even go to college. And between my 2 sisters and our spouses, we have 14 master's degrees. I was the first one to come to the US. I was the first one to graduate from MIT. I did a bunch of things. I worked I designed robots back in the late 80s when robotics was not sexy. So I have a first master's is in underwater robotics. There are only 2 places where they employ these people, the US Navy and the oil industry. So I went to the oil industry and the bottom fell out. I left that. Then I went and designed mobile robots for Eastman Kodak, the US Air Force, a bunch of places. Then that company collapsed. Then I said, I want to find a large company which will not collapse. And I joined the Boeing company. And there I designed a robot that assembled the fuselage, the barrel in which we all sit when we ride on a plane, for the Boeing 777. And then later for the 757. And that's when I decided to go to MIT. I got into 5 top 10 schools at that time. And then when I graduated, I designed a robotic line for assembling cell phones. Then I was one of 5 people who developed international strategy for Lucid. Then I was head of marketing and strategy for a $4.3 billion business. So, and then when the bottom fell out of telecom, I left and went to Silicon Valley. I became a venture capitalist. That didn't work out so well because we made one really bad investment. That's when I got on the entrepreneurship path. And in order to figure out how to do this, I sneaked into a conference with journalist credentials. And I asked all the alleged experts, they're saying, in this particular space, what is the one area where there are unmet needs? And of course, everybody wanted to impress the journalists, then they spewed. And from that came the idea for a company that went pretty big. We made a lot of money, and we served clients in 16 countries. But then I kind of got bored with it because I was the only sales guy. And then I started a second company, all with my own money. I turned away outside investment. You know where this is going. This one just blew up in my face in a very bad way. And I almost got wiped out. I had to sell my house, all kinds of stuff. I was just liquidating like you won't believe. And when that happened, I had a number of epiphanies, which I think would be useful to people. We are a good news society. We all focus on strengths. It's like, well, Mike, let me tell you your top 4 strengths, 3 strengths, whatever. What I realized is up until the time you finish college, you're largely leveraging your intelligence. And that's, you're really good in middle school, you go to high school, you get into a good college, you finish college, and you get into grad school if you choose to do that, all because you know how to learn well, memorize well, make connections, all of which require you to leverage your intelligence. But when you go into the workforce, the first job you get is because you're a graduate of school X. So like my job out of MIT was because I was an MIT grad. It was not because I was best suited for the job. That comes in secondary. They're like, oh, wow, he's MIT. He ought to be good. So this is true for everybody. You get hired into your first job based upon how well you've leveraged your intelligence to date. But once you go into the workforce, sure, you need your intelligence, but you need another thing which I've labeled as smartness, which is how to apply your intelligence in the real world. And that includes working with other people. And what I have found, I have a lot of data on this because I've designed and administered various assessments. Many people's careers kind of hit a wall 5 years out of college or 10 years out of college. How many of you know somebody who's highly intelligent, who's hit a wall? And you're saying, Mike is really, really, really intelligent. How come he's not more successful? There is a reason why Mike is not more successful. And what I've found is it boils down to smartness, amongst other things. So I can go on with that, but I'll kind of mention other things.
I'm so intrigued by that concept of smartness and what it means, because we think about intelligence in many different forms and formats today. Primarily, often in vogue today is positive intelligence, or thinking about how we use our EI as well as our EQ. And I'm wondering, Ram, I think what's so fascinating to me, and I'm sure to our audience, is we're often more defined by our failures than we are our successes. So I'm wondering, in terms of your authentic self, what are the words or phrases you use to describe what it means to be authentic, what it means to be happy, what it means to be congruent, to have alignment now between what you say and what you do, and hopefully between what you think, say, and do?
See, I think it boils down to one very simple thing, honesty, which I think is overused. I'll kind of boil it down even more. There is this certain I am a certain person. Okay. You think I'm a certain person. Okay. What many of us do is we say, Mike thinks I'm tall, and therefore I have to act tall all the time. Mike thinks I'm nice. I have to be nice all the time. Okay. Whether I'm a nice person or not is irrelevant. I want to be what Mike thinks I am. Okay. That is not authenticity. what I figured out is you need a high awareness of self. High awareness of self is very different from self-awareness. Very different. Self-awareness is only what you know about yourself. Very often, if I'm looking at my strengths or my weaknesses, if I am introspective, I'm reflective, and I'm willing to look at myself in the mirror, myself, that creates a certain level of self-awareness about my strengths and weaknesses, etc. The other set of things that you could also understand about yourself is by talking to people who know you well. So you know me well and say, Mike, what do you think are 2 or 3 of my biggest strengths? Well, Ram, you're like this, you're like this. And you can give me examples. It can go back years. You can also tell me about weaknesses. At that point, you become what I call a truth teller. So to answer your question, to kind of pull it all back together, you have to be highly self-aware in order to be honest and in order to be authentic. Simply saying, I'm going to be authentic, that's BS. That's total BS, because if you are not aware of yourself, how do you know that you're being authentic?
Self-awareness. Self-awareness certainly at the root of much of authentic leadership. And how do we bring more of who we are to what we do, and how do we help people bring their best to every situation?
No, that's very true, but I still want to go back and harp on one key point, which is awareness of self is very different from self-awareness. Self-awareness is simply what you have understood about yourself, but you can also understand and learn a lot about yourself by talking to others who know you well.
Well, in my little field of organization development, one of the concepts that we've been developing for the last 40 years has been on the use of self, which is to integrate these concepts, I believe, of being self-aware, but also with agency, and to understand that self-awareness has a certain agentic responsibility to it, or there are agentic behaviors that go along with that. And it may be one of the things that distinguishes our field as we pioneer and continue to advance the work of Dave Jamieson, Mayan Chang Judge on the use of self. So critical, I think, to all the Gestalt concepts and self-awareness, and how we effectively intervene in our coaching and our business relationships. Did you bring that to any of your startup ventures, Rob? How was your self-awareness at that time? In any of the ventures you described?
I think my self-awareness has jumped like, I don't know, 10-fold, 100-fold in the last 10 years since I had the debacle. See, we are a good news society, as I said, and society, I don't want to say, Mike, you're an ill-tempered guy. And I do that, and chances are you'll never talk to me again. You're a mean guy. You won't talk to me again. So we all go around. It's kind of like playing, walking on eggshells, trying to be, positive and nice to everybody about everything. And so we create an inauthentic environment. So I was doing that for years. As long as it suited me, I was fine. And in 2013, when this business of mine collapsed, it was a come home to mama time. And
it's 10 years later. Is there a retrospective book in that regard coming out, Ram? What do you think? It's 10 years, 2013 to 2023.
I've actually started 6 books. So I have one that is one draft is over. I'll give you one aha, which I had. See, many of us, like when I had this debacle, I picked up the phone and called my friends, and I said, Mike, please tell me, John, Joe, etc. And these are all people I went to school with, MIT, Harvard, bunch of these people. And they said, the reason why your venture failed was you didn't have the right team, you didn't have the right technology, you didn't have adequate capital. And I said, guys, all this I studied in business school many, many years ago. You're not telling me anything new. Then about 8 weeks later, I was thinking about this, and I said, what's missing? What's missing? What's missing? Because I figured there was something missing. I noticed a pattern in what they were telling me. They said I failed in that venture because, 1, I lacked something. 2, whatever they said I lacked was external. So I flipped that and I said, what if I had failed in that venture, not because I lack something, but because I have something. And two, what if it is not external to me, but internal to me? In other words, did I fail in that venture because of who I was at that time? And I label those the silent killers of success. Things within and around us that cause us to fail. And one of the people I talked to was Sean Brown, was the worldwide head of alumni relations at McKinsey. He said, "This is neat stuff. Come up to Boston, talk about this." So I'd come up with 3 reasons, became 7, it became 12. I spoke, then I got invited by the Sloan Club of Boston, then I spoke at MIT, then I spoke at Sloan. So I found 2 groups of things that hold people back. One is these silent killers that occur within you, in and around you. Second one is our relationship with money. You have a certain relationship with money. You do, I do, each one of us does. If you have a negative relationship with money, one, you'll have difficulty making money or holding on to it, which was my case. 2, if you're running a business or you're a business leader, even working in a large corporation, if you have a difficult relationship with money, you're not as willing to make more money for the corporation, for example. Not because you say, I don't want to make money, but because those are your inbuilt beliefs. Okay? They leak. They leak in the form of how you perform, and therefore you will not be as successful. 3, after that, those talks in Boston, I got invited to speak at Harvard. And they said, "We heard you gave a good talk. Tell us, come give a talk." They said, "What's the title?" I said, "Silent Killers of Success." They said, "Come up with a different title." So I said, I went to MIT. I had this debacle. So I said, why many smart people are not as successful as they think they should be. They said, "Okay, we like it." I said, "How many people should I expect for the talk?" They said, "It's a Tuesday evening, 40 to 50 people." Mike, 220 people showed up in person.
Oh my gracious.
220 people showed up. I said, aha. So I went and dug into it. I found over 80 reasons why highly intelligent people are not successful. Hired 2 psychologists. We winnowed those 80 down. And they said, you say 80, we say 16 factors. Each of these factors can either enable your success or disable it. And these are factors that are particular to people who consider themselves highly intelligent, or who are intelligent by way of high IQ, or I graduated from Harvard, or leaders are very, very, very they fall in this group of people who are, because you don't become a VP of some company because you're of low intelligence. It doesn't work that way. You obviously have high intelligence. You have a good amount of EQ. You have a good amount of smartness. Like people who are engineers, doctors, lawyers, they're much more intelligent than average. And many people who consider themselves to be smart, who am I to tell you you're not? You think you're smart? Guess what? These 16 factors come into play. So I've actually designed an assessment, which has now been taken by over 400 people from all the top schools. And I found that the number one reason why people who are highly intelligent are not as successful as they'd like to be is they fail to act. They have poor action orientation. They don't act in a timely fashion. That is behavior. But what I found was underlying it, perfectionism is one of the biggest reasons why highly intelligent people, they have high standard. They say, I have high standard. It's not ready yet. By the time you're ready, the market is gone. Second thing, which I found was one of my problems, you notice I said I'm writing 6 books.
Yes.
I stopped 5 and I'm only writing 1 now, because one of the big 3 reasons is novelty seeking. You jump from one idea to the next idea, to the next idea, to the next idea. You don't do any of them well, and you don't see any of them through to completion. Like I have a big poster here on the wall in front of me where I have a list of things I'm working on. It used to have, I don't know, about 25 or 30 Post-it notes. You know how many it has now? 1. That's the only thing I'm working on, nothing else. If I have to work on something else, I'll move this out and I'll only work on 1. There is a lot to be said for focus. So quick summary of what I'm saying is, like, what I learned is, if you want to be successful in life, And if you want to be a successful business leader, you need four things. One, you need to have, because you're already like 5-10 years out of college, you need to go and identify your silent killers of success and mitigate them. Two, you're obviously pretty intelligent. You need to go and identify if any of these smartness factors, these 16 factors, are affecting you, and obviously they'll be affecting you, but that you are using them in an enabling way, not a disabling way. Third thing, if you're any kind of a business leader, you need to have a positive relationship with money. If it's negative, it'll blow up in your face. I have a simple assessment which has a 81% certainty. You answer 16 questions, and I'll tell you with an 81% certainty whether you're likely to become more successful or be less successful in business. And the fourth thing, this I found after reading a lot about, I don't know if you know this guy, why am I? Nassim Taleb. He wrote this very, very famous book called Anti-Fragile. I want to figure out if you are good at learning from every success or failure that you have in your life. Whether you succeed or you fail, you need to learn, which automatically means that you become better after each success or failure. So there is only one way for Mike, up. You're always going to get better. So these four things: identify and mitigate your disablers, look at your relationship with money, look at your relationship with the smartness factors, figure out if you're good at learning from your successes or failures. You take these through and encapsulate them. It will tell you what you need to work on and how you can become better. And I've over the last 10 years developed assessments for each of those four. And I can pinpoint for a person saying, here's your problem, here's your problem, here's your problem.
And I know that one of the things you've launched in the iAchiever Institute, Ram Iyer, is you talk about the principle of being unstoppable. And one of our recent guests, perhaps last season on Authentic Change with Mike Horn, was Alden Mills, the CEO of Perfect Fitness, the inventor of the Perfect Push-Up, from Shark Tank, identified as maybe one of our number one top on a top list by Entrepreneur Magazine, and former Navy SEAL platoon commander and Division I athlete. And what Alden writes about this power of unstoppability. Why don't you explain that in terms of the iAchiever Institute? I think it'd be fascinating to me and our audience.
Well, see, it boils down to what I told you about anti-fragility. See, unstoppable is, let's say you have something good that happens to you. Very often we let it get to our heads, our egos bloat up. Once we become full of ourselves, our performance lags. Complacency usually sets in. On the other hand, if you have a failure, people throw a towel over their heads and say, oh my gosh, this is the end of my life. Okay? You have neither arrived, because you only arrive on the day you die, nor is your life ended because you're not dead yet. The question is, are you capable of learning from your successes and your failures and know what to do the next time and what not to do the next time? And if you practice that on a regular basis, you essentially do become unstoppable.
That's really wonderful to consider and to think about. Also, in your work at the iAchiever Institute, in addition to becoming unstoppable, being better, more confident with what you have, you also talk about, and you talked about it in our podcast today, about making more money, the business thinking and business mindset, and a method to it. Could you explain a little more about that, please, Ram?
Yeah. See, there's a very famous book that many of you may have read called Mindset by Carol Dweck out of Stanford. In that, it basically says, Mike, do you have a fixed mindset or do you have a growth mindset? Which is a wonderful question to ask. One of the problems that it created, unintentionally, is many people think there are only two kinds of mindsets. There are almost 8 billion people on the planet, there are almost 8 billion mindsets because everybody is shaped uniquely by their experiences, what they believe in, what they value, etc. So I've actually gone and created a mindset model. I can talk to people for an hour to 2 hours, and I can tell you what drives you and what holds you back just from conversing. I can't name the person, but I interviewed the CEO of a Fortune, I think they're Fortune 50 or maybe even Fortune 25. Every one of you has heard of this company. When I interviewed him, I did this with Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, the coach, who's a good friend of mine. He and I flew to interview this person. So I took him
Oh,
aside and I
wonderful.
said,
Marshall endorsed my last book too. Wonderful.
"Oh yeah. He's a good friend. He's a friend to many people as well. Many people. So I took him aside and I said, the CEO, and I said, by the end of this interview, I'm going to tell you certain things about you that very few people probably know. I remember him kind of shrugging his shoulders and saying, yeah, whatever. So at the end of the interview, I took him aside and I said, here are the 3 things that drive you and 2 things that hold you back. And he says, how the hell did you know that? I said, you told me. He said, when did I tell you? I said, during the interview. So there are ways of, unless you surface your own personal mindset, you don't know what to work on. So in the IIQ Institute, like when I work with people, there are tools and worksheets that many people use, which I also use. But then sometimes, like in fact, right now I got an email from somebody who's an MIT grad with 2 masters, who's been jobless for the last 8 months. And I'm going to sit down with him and figure out what in his mindset is holding him back. And it could be a belief. It could be a certain value that he has, something he values more versus less, some rule that he follows. There are about 40 factors I've identified. And if you figure that out, and if you can go and make that one tweak, that one little switch you flip, your life will be dramatically different quickly. So this is an extension of Carol Dweck's book, meaning you have a growth mindset, which means you're willing to look at yourself and look at the world around you. And if you can understand yourself, which creates greater self-awareness, and you're authentic and you're honest with yourself, you can then acknowledge what changes you need to make. And then if you make the commitment and live intentionally, you can make those changes. You make those changes, you will see results that are dramatically better than what you've seen thus far.
Shirzad Chamine, the author of the New York Times bestseller, Positive Intelligence, states that only 20% of teams and individuals achieve their true potential. Agree or disagree, Ram?
I agree. I would think the number is even lower than 20%. Okay, because see, the thing is, if you don't have a high awareness of yourself, not just self-awareness, awareness of self, how do you know that you've reached your potential or not? I think too many people think they have. To me, this notion of I've achieved my potential, I don't think so, because each one of us is capable of great things. The only reason you haven't achieved greater things is because you haven't tried, you haven't put in the effort, you haven't done it. So I would say the number is lower, but there's a corollary to what he said, which I think every one of your listeners should pay attention to, which is every one of you, and I'm not a BS guy, I'm an MIT engineer. Every one of you is capable of doing a whole lot better than you currently are, period. You can do a whole lot better. Only thing is, do those things I mentioned, and you will see that you will become more and more successful every day, every week, every month.
Rama, how do you help people who feel like they're stuck on a treadmill, that they're constantly working hard but not moving forward?
Well, generally, there is a reason. I typically administer these 4 assessments to people, and that quickly helps me to pinpoint where the biggest levers are. So for example, on this iSmart and Successful, I know what the typical problems are amongst this large database. But what really matters is if you come to me, I need to know what is holding Mike back, because all the other stuff is interesting knowledge. This is specific knowledge. And then there are ways to mitigate that. And that needs to be done one at a time. For example, like this action orientation I mentioned is a problem for 93% of the people who took the assessment, 93. But you also know that there are many things you know you could do, but you're not doing. I was astounded that it was as high as 93%. And it is a bigger problem. Action orientation is a bigger problem amongst women than it is for men. Okay. What I was looking at some of the results this morning. Women are more risk averse than men are. May not be a surprise to some people, but the difference was almost 10 points, 10 percentage points. So there are ways of looking at this thing. You can slice and dice it based upon your education. You can look at it based upon your gender, what kind of profession you have, and then look at your individual report, and then come up with a game plan on how you can make certain changes in order to become more successful.
Well, and how do you help people, who know that something needs to change, but it's right to this point that you're making. You have people who they know something needs to change, but they don't know what to change or where to start. How do they work with you in that regard? I know people will visit you at mitramiyer.com and gain some insight there, but how does someone start?
The best thing is to talk to me. See, many people, like the other day, I was talking to this MIT grad who has an annual base salary of $500,000, base salary, and then bonuses, stock options, etc. on top of that. And guess what? Do you think she started working with me yet? No. Action orientation, because she's still trying to get all the ducks lined up. And that conversation started about 3 months ago. So if people are willing to be honest with themselves and have a growth mindset, meaning they're open to listening to the feedback that the assessments are providing. And then I've been there. I've seen the highs and I've seen the lows. I will guide you honestly. The solutions are generally one-on-one, specific to you as an individual. And change will happen. Like, say, you start with me now, before Christmas, you'll see big changes. You know why I know? I've tried these myself.
And isn't that to your point? And maybe just you could say something as we begin to wrap up and think about closing our show, Authentic Change with Mike Horn today, where we have the guest Ram Iyer. And Ram, you know, there are a lot of people out there who believe that if someone just showed them the way, they could make it happen. And certainly, given your experiences, you seem well suited to that. Could you comment or elaborate on that for our audience as a way of wrapping up about knowing that, hey, I need somebody to show me and I'll be able to do this?
See, I'll tell you, I'll give you a simple example. Like somebody who went to Harvard, okay? I spoke to the Harvard Business School Alumni Association recently, who is not successful, according to them, okay? Not my definition, their definition. They don't go around saying, gee, Mike, I just want to let you know I'm not very successful. I'm trying to figure out what to do. The entire society expects them to be successful, and therefore they kind of like hide it. They don't tell anybody about it, okay? And then let's say they want help. They would rather settle for the life they have. This is true for a lot of people. They settle for the life they currently have, then make the commitment to change, because that would also require them to acknowledge to others that they are less successful than they would like to be, or they think they should be. Once they cross that, identifying what to work on, to me, that's the easy part, because I've spent 10 years trying to figure out how to do that. I can do that part. The next part is the hardest. Many people still carry this notion that change is instantaneous. You go talk to Ram and tomorrow your life will be different. Too many snake oil salesmen, consultants, and advisors and coaches sell that kind of a value proposition, which is blatantly untrue. Change takes effort. Change takes time. Change is hard work. I'm not saying you'll be toiling, but unless you put in the effort, you won't see the results. So if you keep those in mind, I can absolutely help you, authentically help you. I can tell you that honestly, but you need to show up ready, with not your game face on, but willing to play the game in earnest. And then we can get you much closer to the finish line.
How wonderful. And Ram, in addition to folks visiting you, which will all be in the show notes at mitramiyer.com, what are the best ways for people to be in touch with your work?
Well, I post pretty much every week on LinkedIn and on my mitramiyer.com, which is simply MIT, my first name and last name.com /blog. I post those there as well. If you want to reach out, see, best thing is just acquiring knowledge. A lot of people think knowledge is power. I think knowledge is useful, but unless you take action, which is generally the number one issue people have, it's fairly useless. You could be an encyclopedia of whatever, but if you don't know how to use it, or if you do not put it to use, it's useless information. It's junk. So best thing is talk to me, email me. So the best email is Ram, my first name, at mitramiyer.com.
Oh, how wonderful. That'll be great. And it's been such a delight to be in conversation with you today, Ram Iyer. I mean, it's such a distinguished career and so much still ahead for all of the work that you're doing now on helping others to live a prosperous life and to bring the best of who they are to what they do. So until the next episode, thank you, Ram Iyer. It's been a pleasure.
Mike, thank you very much for the opportunity.
And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.